All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Premier Esports Academy web series. My name's Dan Himmelstein, founder and brain coach at Premier Esports Academy. And this week, we're going to be talking about part 4 of our Flow series. So if you haven't watched the first 3, make sure you do. However, this one's pretty standalone as well. Today, we're going to be talking about concentration and focus. So this is a really big one. Probably one of the bigger concepts of flow, and one of the bigger reasons why flow will happen is being totally absorbed in the task at hand, total concentration on the task in front of us. So let's get into our PowerPoint today. Let's see if that works out. And it did. So concentration on the task at hand. Now, there's a lot that's going to go into this one, so make sure we really pay attention to this. If it works, cool. So, concentration, our focus, our attention, it's a limited capacity. So, what it does is it can promote optimal enjoyment and an optimal performance. So, if we're totally focused, we're totally concentrated on the task in front of us, we can really take in all that's happening and begin to really enjoy all the processes, all the moment-to-moment things that are going on in your performance. So, that's a really great side effect is we can really enjoy our esport, our performance. So how to do this? We have to figure out how to eliminate irrelevant cues, and we have to first identify what those irrelevant cues are. So we have to be able to put aside our outside arguments, relationships, any real stressors that's going on in our everyday life. We have to figure out ways to put those aside and to compartmentalize them for the time being so that we can really focus on the performance, so that we can focus on the task at hand. Now, this may not seem like an easy task, and you guys may have experienced times where outside life started pouring into your performance. And that's why I put up here that deep concentration, it takes practice. It's something that you really have to learn how to do and learn how to do efficiently. So we'll talk about how the mind naturally wanders, but we really have to make sure that we're practicing this skill. We're practicing putting everything aside, just throwing those blinders on, and putting our performance first. So the one thing I want to mention is that concentration, it's an active process. It's not a passive, well, I'm just going to go and perform and that'll then take my focus away. It's really an active process on concentrating on the task at hand, making sure that our mind isn't wandering throughout our performance. So how to do this? So our body is always in the present. Our body can't be in the future, and our body can't be in the past. I think that's pretty straightforward. So we have to sync our mind to that present state, to that task-oriented state. So during our performance, so this diagram is actually during our performance. So, and this is, all to influence flow, all to influence a state of flow. So there's times where we do want to focus on these things, but if we're trying to influence flow within a performance, we have to make sure that we're staying right in the present, right there in the middle, task-oriented. So, if we're looking back in the past, we may find that we're experiencing the what-ifs, regret, things of that nature, and that's going to take away our concentration. That's going to take away our focus on the task at hand. And the same goes for if we're thinking about the future. So anxiety might arise about the outcome of this event or the outcome of this performance. So we want to really make sure that we're staying right there in the middle. There's a lot that can come from looking into the future if we're winning and if we're losing. If we're winning, then it's pretty likely we may experience some complacency and things could start to fall apart. If we're losing, we're going to start thinking we're going to start feeling a little anxious and trying to really going to start to put our attention on how do we come back, how do we still win this game, instead of just focusing on what's right in front of us, whatever the task is, how do we perform our task. So attention is a limited capacity. And I can't say that enough. There's only so much room, so much space that we can allocate to certain things. So if we're spending our attention on the wrong things, we're not going to have room for the right things. So I put this diagram up, and some of you may have seen this demonstration before in the past. But, just to walk you guys through it, you put the golf balls in a jar first, and, hey, is this jar full? Many people will say yes, many people will say no. Cool. So we throw some sand in there. Now, starting to look a little more full, or we put some rocks in there. I'm sorry. We put some rocks in there, some bigger rocks that'll fit through the cracks. Is it full? No. Yes. Cool. We'll put some sand or some salt or some grain things in there and say, great, now is it full? And actually, it's still not full. There's room for what we have here is a beer, but I like to say chocolate milk or other things of that nature. And really, what this all means is the golf balls are the really super important things, the things that we have to put our attention towards. The rocks are a little bit smaller. They can kind of fall through the cracks, and the sand then fills in. So if we were to do this in the reverse order, the sand would take up the whole jar. We wouldn't have any room for the golf balls or the rocks. So we have to make sure that we're putting these in the right order. So what does this mean for us? How does this relate back to esports? So what we want to do is we want to identify relevant cues. We want to identify these golf balls, these big important things that we need to put into our attention most importantly. And we can, in this example, we can really we want to try and leave out the rest of the stuff. The rocks and the salt, because those are going to be our everyday problems. Those are going to be small arguments. Those are, let's call it, monetary gains, things of that nature, when the golf balls are really our task at hand. That's what we really want to focus on. Now, it's interesting to notice that in this diagram, there's probably a dozen golf balls, and there's probably hundreds of rocks and thousands of grains of salt. So that actually applies to our performance. All these tiny little things that go on, small arguments, day-to-day stuff that just needs to be forgotten. There's a lot of it, and that's why we often focus on it, and that's why it can be very overwhelming sometimes. And, we start filling our jar with all that sand first, and it's like, I have to go back to my performance, and, we can't fit those golf balls in. So identify what is going to be important to you during a performance, and identify what can be eliminated. Oh, and to bring it back to the beer or the chocolate milk, what that says is there's always, time for something that you really enjoy. There's always that little extra space that, we can really fit in. However, while we're performing, let's try and keep it to the golf balls. Now, like I said, attention's a limited capacity. So if you see in this little diagram, it's mindful or mindful. It's a nice little contrast of having your mind full versus being at peace, being able to focus on the trees, the nature, things of that nature. So preventing the wandering mind, this is what it's all about. Like I said earlier, the mind has a natural inclination to wander. We've all been in class or reading a book, and all of a sudden we're halfway through the page and we realize we haven't read anything. We've been thinking about something different. It's happened to me a million times, especially when I was reading old boring textbooks. But anyway, that's one thing that we're really going to watch out for, and that's what we really have to train, that concentration, that focus. So some ways here to train this focus and to make sure that we are keeping it. Meditation's a great one. So I could walk you or tell you about a breathing exercise that can be done that will really help you guys start to train this this concentration piece. So we want you to sit steady, sit still, and just start counting your breaths in and out. So whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, out, exhale, and counting, and keeping a nice cadence and really counting out that cadence in your mind. And what I want you to do is I want you to start a stopwatch at the beginning of this. And whenever your mind wanders, open your eyes and take a look at that stopwatch and see how long you are actually able to maintain focus on solely your breath. Now, less advanced people or less advanced people who haven't practiced this skill much might find that 10 seconds their mind started to wander. They might find that 20 seconds their mind started to wander. But over time, if we're training this, we'll start to realize that we can do this for much longer periods of time. And this is going to be important because there's very few esports out there that you can hold focus for 20 seconds and then you're good, and then another 20 seconds and you're good. It's more often more elongated, a longer period of time that you need to maintain that concentration. So this meditation piece, focusing on that breathing, is a really, really, really good exercise, and it's kind of fun, to see what is actually taking your mind away and how long that's taking. So that's another important piece. It's important to recognize what is causing your mind to wander. Is there a specific pattern of thought? Do I keep thinking about my dog at home? Do I keep thinking about an argument that I had with a friend a week ago? So what is it? And let's try and address that. So the next one can be plan ahead. Plan ahead for what you need to focus on. Like I said before, figure out what those relevant and irrelevant cues are and start eliminating them. The irrelevant cues, and make sure you know what you really need to focus on. The next one is some refocusing techniques. Now, some refocusing techniques might include keywords. They might include a natural pause in the game where you find that you can take a deep breath and refocus and get that concentration back through. Let's call it in between rounds in Street Fighter V, where we can, take a second, take a deep breath, get our mind back to where it needs to be, and then go and execute those tasks at hand. And then you can also use task goals. So I mentioned last week a little bit about clear goals and how that can help out. So that's going to apply to this as well. Make sure you set those task goals ahead, know what you need to do on a moment-to-moment basis, and know how you're going to receive feedback on them. So with that, that will be the end of this week's video. So let's bring it back to this big screen. So I have to mention this every single time I talk about flow and the flow experience. The more we consciously try and put ourselves into a flow state, the less likely it is that we will actually be there. These videos are simply to give you an understanding of the different elements that it takes to achieve that flow state, and how to train ways that we can further influence it. So it's preparing before the performance, and hoping that during the performance we can achieve this flow state with all this awesome practice that we've been doing. So with that, I'll leave you there. Make sure you check out the first 3 videos in the flow series. Really, really cool stuff. Especially the one about challenge skill balance. I keep mentioning it, but that's really one that's super in your control. I think it's really, really cool. Merging action and awareness, that one's another really cool one. That's video number 2 of the flow series. And then last week we talked about clear goals and unambiguous feedback. That's going to be part 3 of the flow series. So again, this was part 4 of the flow series, concentrating on the task at hand. Hopefully you guys were able to pull some techniques out of that you guys can use moving forward, and train that deep level of focus, that deep level of concentration. So with that, make sure you follow me on Twitter. My handle's on the bottom right hand of your screen. It is at @dhims_esports. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you know when new content is coming out. And with that,